welcome back. Today we're going to talk about impasse resolution. Those are big words. Basically, when the union and the company cannot agree. They've tried to negotiate, they're trying to bang out a new contract, and they reach what's known as an impasse. Impasse means you can't go any farther. So you have to resolve an impasse. The point is, we're bargaining. One side wants something, the other side refuses to give. So this is a dangerous situation. Impasse can't be resolved. It's headed to all kind of problems. The biggest one being strikes, loss of wage, loss of production, loss of sales. So impasse resolution is a pretty big deal. Pretty big deal. In fact, most of us that have any information about a union organization activity, we get it through impasse resolution. When the union goes out on strike, when the company digs its heels in, that makes national news. So that's when we see all of the workings of this conflict resolution going on, is when they reach an impasse. If they don't reach an impasse, it doesn't make the news. Nobody cares. Well, man, you don't care about it. The union cares about it, the company cares about it. But if they're getting along fine, they're just fussing and fighting, and they finally reach a resolution, that's not news. What's news is we're fussing and fighting and we're getting ready to strike. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The resolution of that impasse. Again, sometimes we just cannot reach an agreement. Remember, we talked about earlier, a year out, year and a half out before the contract is going to come up, we start kind of negotiating off the record and on the record, and we talk. When I say we, the union and the company, and they're trying to bang it out, and they're trying to feel each other out in position, and it usually works. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the union's saying, we need this, we need more of what we have. Sometimes the companies are going, the economy is so bad we can't give you anything now, we're barely hanging on. So no, we can't do that. And it seems like it's going to reach an impasse. What are we going to do? How are we going to resolve this? The resolution of impasse can be helped, can be facilitated through third parties. Third parties will come in, people that are not in the union, people that are not in the company, to try to sit down between the two parties and help them resolve this situation. There are two basic types. Anytime you say that, somebody goes, oh, what about this and what about that? Yeah, there are two basic types of third-party resolutions when it comes to union management impasse situations. The first one is mediation. The second one is arbitration. And we're going to talk about both of these at length. You remember the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act. I know you remember that. That was the act that came about after World War II that kind of evened the playing fields. Remember, the Wagner Act in '35 gave all the power to the unions. Management didn't even have a voice, basically took away their First Amendment rights. It was changed, it was amended in 1947 with Taft-Hartley, which basically leveled the playing field. What the union can do, management can do. What management can do, the union can do. And that was just fair. It was the way to equalize the situation. But the Taft-Hartley Act also created something called the Federal Mediation Conciliation Service. Oh my goodness, what a name. The Federal Mediation Conciliation Service, better known gladly as the FMCS. What are these guys thinking when they name stuff like this? But anyway, lawyers, what are you going to do? So what do y'all think about that? They set that up because they realized in Taft-Hartley that there were going to be impasses. There were going to be situations where the two parties could not come together. And to help them in their economic situations, we need to get them together. Excuse me a minute. Hold on. God, who's calling me now? Oh man, I've been waiting on this. Snoop, what's up, Daddy? All right, Snizzle. Man, nothing, you know what I'm saying? Where you been? I know it's been a week. God, that was crazy. That was how. Anyway, wait a minute, I really can't talk right now. Look, you got to get your money, and your money's got to get you, you know what I'm saying? That's what I'm doing right now. I'm just getting my money. So look, can't talk to you right now. I will get with you this evening. You know what I'm saying? All right, peace, my brother. Sorry about that. I had to take that one. Taft-Hartley Act knew there were going to be situations where these two groups were not going to get along. And again, because of, we want them to get along. We want the economic to continue. We want the worker to get a wage. We want the company to make the money. We want the product that the company's sending to me. That's what I really want because I'm selfish. So we want that to happen. This impasse to be resolved. There are other times when it in fact truly affects the quality of life of the United States. Y'all don't remember this, but back in the 60s, coal strike, when a lot of people used coal to heat their houses. And the coal company, the miners would go on strike right when it was getting cold because they knew that. That's a situation where it affects the quality of life in this country, and politicians cannot stand that. So it's not just economics. Sometimes it has to do with the quality of life. And so 1947, Taft-Hartley said, we need to put something in place that will help these parties avoid that. And they created this thing called the FMCA, Federal Mediation or Conciliation Service. Good gracious. FMCS was a government agency that what it did, it trained people to go in as mediators or arbitrators between these two parties that were having this conflict, this impasse, and to help them resolve that conflict. So let's talk about this third-party intervention. We talked about the point that let's talk about this third-party intervention. We talked about their responsibility was to get in between these two parties to help them resolve. So here's a basic rule that people must understand when they hear about mediation and arbitration. Both parties, the union and the company, have to agree, number one, to go to mediation or arbitration. Neither party can be forced into mediation or arbitration. So not only do they have to agree to go into the process, they then both have to agree on the individual, that third party person, that real live human that's going to sit between them and help them resolve this conflict. So number one, both parties have to agree to the mediation or arbitration. Number two, both parties have to agree on the individual that will be doing the mediation or the arbitration. So there's this myth that, oh, I was forced into this. No, it's absolutely voluntary unless it's in the contract. A lot of organizations that are unionized can't manage, don't have the ability to take a strike. And sometimes the unions don't have the ability, economic ability, to strike. So they will actually put in the contract that by the end of this contract, if there is an impasse where we cannot come to a new contract, a third party will come in automatically to help us crank out this new contract. So while you can't be forced into it, the contract can call for it. So there's a little distinction there. So let's talk about mediation. Mediation is a very soft form of intervention. The reason I say soft, mediation is like marriage counseling. The marriage counsel sits down between the two parties. They try to find common objectives. They try to dissolve issues that they think aren't really that bad but have become bad because they've just never been resolved. But it's completely voluntary on both sides. So let's forget about the marriage part. Let's talk about the union and the company. There is no teeth. There is absolutely no teeth in mediation. all the mediator can do is say, come on, don't you see their side? Or wouldn't it be better if both of you agreed and you moved on? So there's no teeth. Both sides, through mediation, can constantly and consistently say, I disagree with that, I'm not going to do that, I don't believe that. So mediation can basically end in no result at all. So why do people go to mediation? That's a good question. And the use of mediation has kind of fallen over the years. In fact, it's fallen way, way off over the years. So let's talk about the other one, arbitration. Arbitration is binding. An arbitrator comes in to sit down between the two parties. Now remember, the only way an arbitrator would ever sit down between the two parties is that both have agreed to, number one, arbitration, and number two, they have agreed to the decision that the arbitrator is going to make, and number three, they've agreed on the arbitrator. So it's not like this is a surprise, this was forced on me. Absolutely not. I chose to go into arbitration. I agreed to follow the arbitrator's decision. And let me start over. Three things. Number one, I agreed to go into arbitration. I agreed to follow the arbitrator's decision. And good gracious, here we go. Number one, I agreed to arbitration. Number two, here we go. Three things when you call an arbitrator. You have agreed to arbitration. Number two, you have agreed to abide by what the arbitrator decides. And number three, you decided who the arbitrator was going to be and agreed on it, both parties. So there's never, I was forced into this, I didn't see this coming, this is crazy. None of that. You agreed to all that. An arbitrator is like a judge. An arbitrator will come in, let me rephrase that. An arbitrator is like a judge, but if you decide to go to arbitration, you will send both sides, the union and the company will send, here's our proposal. This is what we want, this is what we want, there's a conflict, they don't meet. The arbitrator will receive that a month ahead of time. There's no said rule that it's got to be 30 days in advance, but it's usually 30 days in advance. And the arbitrator will go over those contracts with a fine-tooth comb, both of them, looking at all kind of trends, economics, etc., etc. The arbitrator will come usually to the facility, and it'll be like a 1 or maybe 2 day process. It's quick. Once the arbitrator comes to the location, decision is going to be within 24, 48 hours. And it truly is like a court. You walk in, the union will walk in, the company will walk in, you present your position. Here's why we want an increase. The company will come back and say, here's why we can't give that increase. And they will both give their position. The arbitrator will say, let me retire to my chambers, although it's not chambers, it's usually Motel 6. And within that day or the next day, will render their decision. Arbitrator's decision is final. There is no appeal. Absolutely cannot appeal. Within this confines of the NLRB and union management relationship. So it's very, very unnerving when you go to arbitration, because you are putting that decision in a third party's hands. And that's why union management try to stay away from arbitration. I've got a dear friend of mine, one of my professors. I'm not going to call his name because he would call me up and shoot me. But the man is world famous in terms of labor economics and was an arbitrator. However, the man is very pro-union. We'll tell you that. Believes the union is best for mankind, it's best for our economy, it's best for the consumer. He believes that. And he was an arbitrator, and people would call him in to arbitrate, and you can just guess whose side he usually came down on. To the point now where management will not use him. Remember, it's got to be both sides agree. Management will not call him. If the union says we'd like for this guy to be our arbitrator, they say absolutely not. A couple of years ago, by the time you see this, it might be forever ago, a football player, Terrell Owens, wide receiver, was playing for the Philadelphia Eagles. Man was an all-star. Man was just a freak when it came to being able to catch a ball and do that. Man was also just didn't get along with anybody. Caused trouble everywhere he went. Was with the 49ers for a while. The man's scoring touchdowns, but he's such a difficult human being they could not even have him on their team. He's halfway through the season, Philadelphia Eagles, and he's having a breakout year. And it's like right in the middle of his contract. He's in a year 2 or 3 year contract, having a breakout year. During the season, he goes to the Eagles and says, "You need to give me a bazillion more dollars. You need to give me more compensation because I'm doing so well." And they said, "Well, Terrell, when your contract comes up in a year and a half, we can talk about that." He goes, "No, I want it right now. Absolutely right now." He said, "I'm not playing." Didn't play for 4 games. Didn't know what to do. The labor union, the football union was going crazy. The Eagles, you're being bad. Why don't you just give them a little bit of money, et cetera, et cetera. Well, in that contract, it calls for an arbitrator in case that happens. Arbitrator came in, looked at the contract, said the Eagles have upheld everything they've ever said they were going to do. They're paying you exactly what they said they were going to pay you. You cannot just break it in the middle of the contract because you want to. Excuse me. Favored with the Eagles. Favored with the Eagles. Terrell Owens lost the suit. Gene Upshaw, who was the head of the players union, in a comment right after the decision, said that whoever the arbitrator was that they had both agreed on would never be used by the NFL again. Absolutely never be used by the NFL again. So this just tells you that both sides are looking for people who are going to lean toward them. And most arbitrators, if they want to keep working, usually have to keep it right in the middle. So it kind of keeps everybody honest, and it kind of keeps this process going. And so that's a good thing. All right. So what happens when neither side will agree to arbitration? Because if you agree to arbitration, there's going to be an end. There's going to be an end to this situation. But we don't agree to arbitration. We're trying to hold to our guns. We don't want some third party coming in and making a decision. So we still have an impasse, and we still have an impasse. And the contract ended on December 31st. And we've been negotiating, for a whole year, and nothing's happened. And December 31st happens. And now it's January 1. What happens? January 1, the union does not have a contract. It's over. It ended 24 hours ago. The union does not have a contract. Usually the strike won't happen on January 1. Usually they will continue discussions a little while longer, a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month. But at some point, if they cannot reach an agreement, the union will say, we're going to strike. Now it has to go back to the local union. That's where it is anyway. And it has to go back to the members of the local union, and they have to vote to strike. The leader, the president of that local union, the steward of the local union cannot say we're striking tough. It has to be a majority vote, because there's a lot to do this. There's a lot to deal with this for these union members. The minute you strike, you are not making a dime. There is a myth that, well, when these guys go on strike, the union's just paying their salary. That is crazy. The union doesn't pay you a dime. The union will lend you money that you have to pay back. The union might help you out with medical expenses every now and then, but that is very, very infrequent. When you strike, the union is not paying your salary. You don't have any income. It's hard to go to the grocery store. It's hard to make your loan payment on your house or your car. It's hard to pay that money to the university that your kid's going to because you're not having any income. So when you get ready to vote on that strike, these things are weighing heavily on those members' minds. Dadgum. I believe we ought to strike. I believe it's an injustice here, et cetera, et cetera. But do I believe it hard enough to put my financial well-being at risk here? Because that's what they're doing. So the point is, you have a vote, and it's not an easy vote. So you have a vote, and you go out on strike. You vote to strike, to withhold your labor. Now, who's striking? Obviously, the bargaining unit. The part of that company, the small part of that company, or it could be the large part of that company, but it's not the entire company. the part of the company that works under that contract has decided to withhold their labor. We are now in the world of strike. There are three kinds of strike. There's an economic strike, which is about 98% of all strikes. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's the unfair labor practice strike, which is certainly legal. We'll talk about what that kind of strike is. And then there's the wildcat strike, which is illegal, and we'll talk about that. So let's start with economic strike. We are striking over economic activities. I want more money. I want better compensation. I want better benefits. I want better workplace conditions. These are called economic conditions, and they're called an economic strike. Again, 98% of all strikes are economic strikes. The contract has run out, and the bargaining unit has decided en masse, we will not give our work to this company. We will not participate. So they're not going to work. The second kind of strike is an unfair labor practice strike. This is the kind of strike when the company has done something that the union determines has been unfair to them, has been unfair according to the contract. The company has broken the contract. They said they weren't going to hire, outsource certain jobs. It was in the contract, but dadgummit, they're outsourcing these things. So the union will call up, the union will usually go to the company and go, dude, stop it. So just because the company outsourced something doesn't mean we can just go on strike right now. The union goes to the company and goes, dude, you need to stop that. That's not in the contract. And they go, tough. We're still going to outsource. Then the company's going to call in the LRB, they probably already called them, and said, there's an unfair labor practice going on right now. And if it doesn't stop by this date, we're going out on strike, even though we're right in the middle of the contract. We're going out on strike. That is legal. That is legal. If the NLRB decides that the company has indeed done an unfair labor practice, the union has the right to strike, to withhold their labor. The third kind of strike, wildcat strike, is where you strike in the middle of a contract. It's a 3-year contract, you're a year into it, you walk out like Terrell Owens did, and just because you don't like the conditions of the contract that you signed, that is illegal. That is absolutely illegal. There's all kind of ramifications that will come about. They're not going to throw you in jail. They're not going to do that. But you lose all your rights. You can't go and say, hey, the company's doing this to me or that. You lose all those rights. So a wildcat strike is absolutely legal. And it's detailed more in the text. If you really want to, if you're interested in that, it's not detailed a whole lot in the text. So that's about basically what a wildcat strike is. If you're in the middle of a contract and neither party has truly done anything that's beyond the scope of that contract, you're in the contract. You are absolutely in the contract. Now you can quit. See, I don't want anybody to ever think that because you're a union member and you're under contract, you can't quit. You can quit anytime you want to. You know, that's just part of the American system. Yes, you can. So I can withhold my labor by just quitting you and walking away? Absolutely. Absolutely. But there again, when I do that, I have no rights under the law once I've done that. So you go on strike. We're striking. Daggum economics, we didn't get what we wanted. We refused to go to arbitration. We don't want to let some third party decide this. So we're out. We're out. What are the behaviors that strikers can do? I can tell you this. They just don't go home and sit by the phone and wait. Usually when they go out on strike, somebody in the union is talking to somebody in the company, probably on a daily basis. But there's no activity. There's no work. At least there's no work by that bargaining unit that has walked away. The first thing about a strike is it has to be peaceful. We've got history of violence all throughout the labor movement in the United States. You know, back in the 1800s, they were beating and shooting, and in the early 1900s, they were still beating and shooting, both sides. And then it settled down. Federal law got involved, where if you started beating and shooting, the government would come in to stop this and derail this kind of activity. So what can strikers do? Well, the first thing they have to do is they have to be peaceful. Again, you can't have violence. You can't be bringing bats and beating people as they're trying to go to work. Number two, you cannot impede the work of the company. By that's a big old word, impede. That means interrupt, get in the way of. You can't block entrances into the factory. You can't be on company property if they don't want you to be on there. Trust me, they don't want you to be on public property. However, you do have a First Amendment right as an American citizen to express your opinion. And this is the most common and visible aspect of a strike, is the picket line, where you have individuals carrying signs, you know, unfair, this company's treating us like dirt, and you can picket, but you cannot picket on company property. You cannot picket so that you disrupt the ingress or the egress of the company, things coming and going in the company. You cannot do that. You can picket across the street, on the sidewalk, and illegal. You can't picket in the road, that's illegal. But you can picket across the street on the sidewalk, or if you want to rent somebody's property across the street to picket. So you can't just walk on people's property, but you can voice your opinion through this picket activity. You can't, that's your First Amendment right. But you can't disrupt the company. You can't disrupt their operations. So what are the employer, the company reactions to a strike? Well, the first thing they can do is they can shut down. They can just lock the doors. We're done. We are not going to do anything until we get this resolved. Nobody's coming in here. I'm locking down the equipment. I'm locking the doors. They don't like to do that. Sales stop. What little bit of inventory you have easily dwindles and goes away. In fact, if companies, through the process, getting ready to go into a strike, contracts about up, they really see there's an impasse, they will build up inventory, which is very costly and very expensive, but at least once the strike happens, I can still be shipping stuff to my customers. Because the one thing I don't want to do is not be able to fill my customers' orders. The minute I don't fill my customers' orders, they're looking for another supplier. And they might just like that other supplier better than they like me, so I don't want that to happen. So, the one thing I can do is I can shut down my operation and just hope that we can get resolved so that I can crank back up to continue making money. So, because while the union employees are not getting a paycheck, the company is not making any sales. They're not making any production. So if they do have a little bit of inventory, once it's gone, there's nothing behind it to ship out. So that's a very risky position, but they will do that. The second thing they can do is continue operations using existing workers. Remember, everybody didn't strike. The bargaining unit struck. So, I'm just making this up. Let's say you had 300 employees at this plant, and 100 of them are in the striking and the bargaining unit, they struck. Well, you've got 200 employees left. They can use those employees to try to go in and do the jobs that these striking workers are going to do. Now, the big problem is these workers don't have the technical skills a lot of times. If it's a very technical job, that's difficult. But at least they're on the payroll. At least they're part of your company. They kind of know what you do. They know the process. So it's a little easier, not much. I've got a dear friend, electrical engineer, went to school with me. We graduated back in the dark ages, back in the mid-70s. She went to work for AT&T as a big shot engineer down in Charleston. This happened about 20 years ago. So this happened in the 80s. Maybe 30 years ago, in the 80s, that a lot of the hourly people at AT&T in Charleston struck. Linemen, operators, those kind of people went on strike. My friend, electrical engineer, from a very prestigious engineering institution, was a operator for 2 months. Was a phone operator for 2 months, back when they had phone operators, answering the phones, connecting people. It was amazing. For 2 months, that's what this person did, because they were trying to put pressure on the strikers. Go ahead and strike. We don't need you right now. We can do without you. So you think about it. I'm sure quality fell. I'm sure production fell, but they kept the thing running. AT&T in Charleston did not shut down during that strike. So you can use existing workers to come in and replace. The third thing you can do is you can hire replacement workers. There's another myth. Oh, when they go on strike, you can't hire. Yes, you can. Oh, absolutely. So you can hire anybody you want to. Once again, if it's a menial task, if it's a repetitive task, I can usually hire people, that have a basic skill level and train them and get them up to speed so that they can continue the operation. However, it's some guy was working on this $40 million machine, and it took me 2 years to really train him so that he could effectively work that machine. I don't want to get some guy off the street and go, here are the keys to my $40 million machine. Please don't break it. I don't want to do that. So sometimes it's easy to hire replacement workers. Sometimes it is not easy to hire replacement workers. Now here's another myth about replacement workers. Once you hire a replacement worker and the strike is over, you have to hire the strikers back. No, you don't. Usually when the strike is over, it's because we've reached a new contract. And the new contract will have language in it that says you've got to hire everybody back. So they protect themselves that way. But there is no law that says you ever have to hire a striker once they strike you. You do not have to hire them back if you don't want to. You want to, they've got the skills, they know your company, etc., but you don't have to. What else can happen to you? What else to the company while you're going through this strike? We've talked about what strikes are and the type of strikes, and the fact that people withhold their labor, and about what your behaviors are. When I say you, the company's behaviors are, so that, we can shut down or we can hire replacement workers. There are other forces that come to play on both the union and the company. Public opinion is now going, this thing's made the news. I'm actually aware that somebody up in the Northeast is on strike. And I'm aware that some company up there is going through this economic situation where they're not being able to produce anything. That was interesting. And then all of a sudden you go to the store about a week later and you notice that your favorite bar of soap is not there. And you go, that's right, that's the company that's having that difficulty. And you go, but I really, really liked Safeguard. Where's my soap? And the Safeguard company's being struck. So there's no production of Safeguard. So now you're mad. You haven't been to the Northeast ever in your whole life. All of a sudden you're interested in the economics of the Northeast because you don't have your favorite bar of soap. Because of that, you can become involved in this. And the easiest way to become involved, if you're not part of the union or part of the company, is through what's known as a boycott, which means you boycott the product. Or you actually become vocal against the union and saying you need to get back to work because you're hurting everybody. You don't want to say selfishly, you're hurting me because I don't have my favorite bar of soap. So you can voice your opinion anyway, either way. But usually when we talk about boycott, we're talking about this external environment who is now sympathetic to the union. Sympathetic to the union and saying they weren't treated right. These people that were making this product, they just really didn't treat the union better, and they need to treat them better so they go back to work and give me my soap. Okay, that's kind of the way it works in your brain. Boycott means I've got this company up there that's making Safeguard. Those poor union guys were being treated bad. You know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to buy a safeguard. I'm going to send that company a message. If you would just treat your people better and hire them back, I'd buy your soap all day long. But guess what? I'm not buying your soap. So I can quit buying your soap. Boycotts have a very tentative effect. The union likes to say this, they have a great effect. Research doesn't really bear that out. So the point is, it's more of a political gesture, that there's a boycott. Now, I'll tell you where boycotts can become effective. Other unions. So I'm a union that's a production union, and I work making soap. Truck driver unions. They'll start having boycotts, but the Teamsters will send out a communique saying, don't buy Safeguard ever again until we tell you it's okay. So there can be this communal kind of influence where unions, other unions that don't have anything to do with making soap, will be sympathetic and they will boycott. And they're usually pretty active and reliable in their boycott. Other boycotts aren't so effective. They really aren't. You can also have the opposite of a boycott, kind of, called a lockout, where the company closes its operations to any striker activities. So we've got this lockout, and there was a facility here that you really liked. NFL is a good example of this. NFL had a lockout in 2012. And basically the players union and the owners could not come to any agreement. And so the player union said, we're going to withhold our labor, we're not going to play. And the company and the team said, well, fine, we're locking the doors. And you go, big deal. Well, an NFL wide receiver can't sit on his couch for 2 months and then they get a call and say, tomorrow we've got a game, and be effective. You know that. These guys, it's every day. They have got to keep themselves physically fit. They've got to continue their practice routines, etc. And these practice routines are very expensive. So and the teams had all of the equipment, the gyms and the machines and the coaching, and all of a sudden you've locked the door. You said, all right, NFL player, every day you sit home on the couch, you become less valuable. You don't have the skills you had. You're not quite as quick as you were. What are you going to do? Well, they can go down to the YMCA, but we're not talking about a bench press down there. We're talking about sophisticated type of machinery. And so that's just kind of a good example that the company can lock you out. You can't come in here and use our facilities, and if you don't use our facilities, your worth plummets. So that's what a lockout can do, can keep people away. The last thing we need to talk about here is bankruptcy. We're talking about strikes and contracts, etc. Bankruptcy. The Supreme Court has decided that if you are put in a strike position and feel that your economic and financial wherewithal is such that you need to file bankruptcy, and the courts will agree that indeed you need to file bankruptcy, because you just can't file bankruptcy if you want to. The court has to agree that you can file bankruptcy, that bankruptcy will effectively end a union contract. Supreme Court has decided that. So guess what? You struck them financially, you put them in a hole, they went bankrupt. Now, y'all know that most bankrupts don't end in the dissolution of the company. They go into bankruptcy, and the term is they come out of bankruptcy. General Motors did that. General Motors went into bankruptcy, and one of the biggest things that happened in General Motors for them, and the reason they are so successful now, is that when they went into bankruptcy, all of those UAW contracts went away. General Motors came back out of bankruptcy. They went to the UAW. Now, they went to the workers. Workers kept working, but the contracts went away. So salaries fell, and all of those benefits fell. And so after they went through all that, GM went back to the workers and back to the unions and said, let's sit down and do a new contract. And in effect, It saved General Motors, which in effect saved those tens of thousands, hundred thousands of jobs that the automobile, the UAW needed. So it was kind of a win-win for both parties. But in fact, it showed you that you can file bankruptcy, and that bankruptcy will eliminate any contracts that are in existence. So we've talked about a lot of stuff here. We've talked about impasse resolution, what happens when we can't come to an agreement. We talked about third parties coming in. We talked about what happens when third parties can't alleviate the situation. It usually leads to a strike. We talked about strikes and behaviors of that. Again, there's a lot more information in the text. Please read that. And I'll see you next time.